welcome to Script Tease, the Blood on the Clocktower Script Building Podcast. I'm your host, Kinky Joe. Out of the 4 types of characters that are present on a script, outsiders have one of the most unique features. They may not even be present in the game. Because they're not in every single game, a good script needs to be able to function without their abilities in play or have outsider modification that effectively begs the question every game whether they're in play or not. This can have a significant effect on us as script builders. Featuring an outsider becomes a test of outsider manipulation choices. Now, you'll note there aren't a ton of outsider manipulation roles. There's only a few that directly add outsiders to the game at all. 4 of them are demons: Legion, Kazali, Lord of Typhon, Fang. Then you have 3 minions, one which was just recently released. I can speak. Baron, Godfather, Xaan. And then you have a couple of townsfolk, balloonists, and then technically the huntsman, which adds a damsel, yada yada. Don't do that very often, but we'll talk about that later. A few of the characters also have more of an impact for outsiders on a given script than usual, and change how the town might approach outsiders or executing outsiders. First off, the Fang. Fang, probably one of my favorite demons. The Fang encourages all outsiders to hide. Because an outsider may become the demon, they want to remain concealed. If the town starts to believe the demon is a Fang, then the town may begin executing all outsider claims. This also means that outsiders are likely to double claim, and I want to go into a concept called claim space. Claim space refers to the likelihood a given role will be claimed. Someone like the mutant cannot claim their role at all, while the same will likely claim if they get pushed. Since a player isn't claiming their role, they're likely to be claiming another player's role, resulting in confusion. The more claim space available, the less double claiming that will be present. The Fang, however, encourages every outsider to play like the mutant or suffer the consequences of being outed if they get Fang jumped to. This does mean when we're building scripts, we need to consider the amount of claimable roles available. Remember, the demon gets 3 bluffs, which may all be townsfolk. If there's 6 townsfolk at a 12-player Fang game, there's only 3 unclaimed townsfolk left. The likelihood of an outsider hitting those is pretty low, not impossible, could happen, and does happen. But to go further into claim space, let's consider an extreme example where a script has the drunk, the marionette, a damsel, a mutant, and a heretic. It's a 12-player game. The marionette and the drunk are both in play. The demon gets 3 bluffs. There's also 7 townsfolk. Literally every townsfolk token is accounted for, and the potential heretic, mutant, or damsel has no choice but the double claim. It gets even worse when you consider that the evil team is aware of the damsel being in or out of play, so if they hear of a damsel announcement, and there's a double claim where one side seems to be clearly lying, evil will identify the damsel with high precision. Speaking of the damsel, it has another unique issue of evil being aware of it in play, and the script builder needs to take that into account. On the tool, you're going to see that there's a column that I put together that defines whether a role is known by evil or not and how. Roles like the king, the hatter, the barber, the snitch are all going to be called out directly to the evil team or indirectly. Since these roles are known to the evil team, they're going to be harder or impossible to bluff. They also pinpoint players who are definitely mechanically not the damsel. This can create unfair scenarios where the good team has no chance because the evil team leaves a suspected damsel alive to be guessed as a Hail Mary. The Godfather is another role that I wanted to talk about real quick. It adds an interesting dynamic to the game because some outsiders are perfectly fine and it's even helpful for them to be executed by town. However, the Godfather gives a form of both punishment to town and potential confirmation depending on the script. This also combines incredibly well with the Fang if players are trying to clear outsider worlds. It makes you question whether executing a outsider in Final 5 is really a good idea or not. There's also a very, very spicy combination that could be incredibly cruel for town that you need to watch out for as a script maker. If there's a damsel and a barber in play, the Godfather will learn when the outsiders are executed. So when a barber dies, the Godfather may have already directly or indirectly identified where the damsel is located, and the demon would be able to barber swap the damsel back in play. This isn't inherently broken, but it can lead to a very, very feels bad game. This is kind of a fragile interaction. It requires advanced play, and honestly, I would point this out in your script write-up if it's something that you're going to feature. Now, the fabled character, the Sentinel, I mentioned earlier, outsiders may not even be present in the game, and this very much depends on player count. At 7 and 10 and 13 players, there's no base outsiders. And maybe this is the player count that you typically have. So if you regularly have these player counts, you can use this fabled to at least give some more bluffing room to evil or allow players to potentially experience outsiders in the game. I am a strong believer that this also pairs very well with a Heretic. I think the Heretic and the Sentinel are made for each other. It allows that to be in or out of play and gives a question mark to both teams. We do tend to build scripts for 10 to 12 players with the emphasis on 12 players, so Outsiders will be mostly a part of our games, but remember that the point of Outsiders is that they're a balancing mechanism at these player counts and on scripts. However, there's nothing wrong with using them to supplement the evil team's ability to create misinfo, survive, or even add a win condition. The next character is the Xaan, which is the newest minion added to the game. The Xaan makes exactly X number of Outsiders in play. This can reduce or add to the Outsider count, but it replaces any other Outsider modification that might exist, such as a Fang or Godfather. This character does a lot of work with very little character text. It also lets us add Outsiders to the game without forcing a script to have a drunk Baron combo, like as you'll see featured a lot, or Godfather confirmation. It's fun because it creates a puzzle for Town and Evil to solve, since neither of them, without any kind of Grim Peekers, know exactly the Outsider count. It also lets Town bluff Outsider in a game with a Xaan. Evil actually wouldn't know exactly if they're telling the truth or not. If a Xaan is in play, solving for the Outsider count directly spells out a night in which Town received arbitrary information. This is good for both good and evil. If you've got a lot of hidden Outsiders of the drunk, it can make it a little more difficult, or simply it just reverses the puzzle and the night of bad information spells out the Outsider count. Well, with this minion being new, I'm going to try to cover it in a separate future discussion. The last one I really want to dive into is the Cannibal. Funny thing about the Cannibal is when Outsiders are executed, the Cannibal is going to gain their ability. This is going to have some weird effects. A Cannibal that eats a Golem may become potentially confirmed, so that could be a very, very strong confirmation situation. If they eat a Damsel, the evil team gets another shot at winning. For trigger on death rolls such as the Barber or the Hatter, Evil might be able to double up on their abilities if they know where the Cannibal is. The Ogre and the Politician can lead to the Cannibal playing for Evil, and a Lunatic will directly tell Evil where the Cannibal are. There's some interesting interactions that need to be considered when you're putting your script together. Side note, if you've ever got a Cannibal to eat a Droison Saint and be executed and lose the game, please let me know. I have to know. I think it's great. Before we go into the Outsider selection tool, I wanted to discuss my favorite Outsider, the Drunk, and not just because we have a lot in common. The Drunk has a special place in my heart for scripts as it provides misinformation, negative Outsider manipulation, it allows Evil to bluff terrible information, and always adds one extra dimension of why a specific thing didn't happen. Because no one knows they are the Drunk. There's this paranoia that can happen to help explain why something is inaccurate or not functioning correctly. Also, when people hear a claim and their information, there's generally only a few possibilities. Either their information is correct, they're evil and lying, they have been poisoned, or they're the Drunk. Without the Drunk on script, one less world can be built and game solves become exponentially easier. All of your Outsiders are now face up, meaning that players know who they are. You might have to rely on poisonings hitting the correct target, and very, very importantly, your storyteller has a lot less agency for game setups. I can't emphasize this enough. The Drunk is a storyteller's best friend. They can see a very unbalanced setup and fix it very simply by placing a Drunk where it needs to go. The Drunk also something that should be on most scripts with the Baron, as the two extra Outsiders are harder to bluff than just one. Alright, let's dive into the script tool. Earlier I mentioned claim space, so that's our first column we have here. I have them kind of segmented into 4 categories. I've got them either claim freely, quiet, hidden, or invisible. And I put a little note here just so it's clear what that means. So when I say claim freely, it means that this role will likely say what their role is if they're pushed. Meaning that there's very likely not a punishment on death or a punishment for the evil team figuring out who they are. We have a lot of roles that you would expect. The Butler, they've got a claim because they're also going to be outed when they're doing their compulsory role, which we'll talk about later. The Puzzle Master, very helpful for them to claim freely. The Golem, they will eventually do it, right? When they punch or who they're going to punch. They might stay quiet for a little bit, but they're very likely to just do their thing and come out. The Moonchild is likely to claim. The Recluse, because they're probably screwing up neighbor information. The Saint is likely to claim because if they get executed, the game ends and their team loses. The Snitch, because they need town to know that there's people in play that have bluffs that they shouldn't have. The Tinker, because the Tinker can really screw up information, especially on its home script when it dies. And then the Zealot might out itself just by voting on every single nomination. Now, when I talk about quiet, these are types of Outsiders that we're thinking that will not want to out themselves because there's some kind of punishment that could happen here. Now, they'll probably say it when they're about to die, or they might confide in somebody secretly, or there might be another reason that they're quiet. Maybe they have an alignment change. I've done that for a couple of these as well. So the barber I've marked as that. The goon, because they could change alignment, they'll probably remain quiet and may even become hidden, they may even become hidden if they get targeted by the evil team. The Hatter, because if they die, they're exponentially bad, depending on if you're running Chaos Hatter or not. And we have the Klutz. The Klutz here, they're kind of borderline. I could have put them as claim freely or quiet. The Ogre, they're going to be quiet until they find out or are sure that they're on the good team, and then they might come out. They might not. I've had some weird Ogre games. And then finally the Plague Doctor, which can be really based on what's on the script with it, but that one's likely to come out eventually. And then finally the Sweetheart, they're going to stay quiet until they die. And again, a lot of these are due to the script that they come from as well when you're looking at the base 3 outsiders. The next ones that we have as a category is hidden outsiders. So these are outsiders that have a reason to not come out at all. Going through them, because there's only a handful here, is the Damsel. The Damsel is hidden. They're not going to come out. They may eventually confide in people, but until they're dead, and even after they're dead, they may hold it in until there's a barber that's dead or a cannibal has another player that they've eaten since then, yada yada. There's many reasons why the Damsel will just stay hidden for a while. The Heretic will potentially not come out until the final day. They're not invisible. We'll talk about the only one that's in the game that's invisible, but they are hidden because they do not want anybody on the evil team to know that they're in play, or the evil team might take control of the game and just kill themselves. The Lunatic, pending the script, and I'd say they're more of a quiet. Well, here's why I marked them as hidden. First off, initially, they have no idea that they're the Lunatic. That could, in fact, be categorized as invisible, but they do tend to find out. There's mechanical evidence if their kills don't happen. There's mechanical evidence if they go up to their minions and their minions don't know who the hell they are. It's a lot easier on custom scripts to keep a Lunatic in the dark for a while. But for the most part, I marked it as hidden because it's kind of a mix of both worlds. I'm not telling you that you can't just do a Poppy Grower, Leviathan, Lunatic game. That's totally fine. They'll never know, very likely, in that game. I'm just saying. All right, then the Mutant. The Mutant's not going to claim because they literally have a punishment if they tell you that they're the Mutant. So they're going to stay hidden until the end, potentially coming out, but then, they're basically one in the chamber for the storyteller to end a day on a execution that you guys probably didn't want to happen. You don't want the Mutant to die instead of whoever town chose. And then finally, the Politician. So the Politician I marked here is hidden because they know who they are. They're likely to play like a POS until such a time that it makes sense for them to come out, or if they think that they haven't done enough for their team to actually come out. Then the category for Droison and misregistration, and I was honestly impressed that there's this many. Going through it all, the Puzzle Master, which is one of the experimental outsiders, has this really interesting dynamic. The Puzzle Master is an outsider, classified anyway, that actually gets information, but at the cost of making a townsfolk, what I would say, an outsider. So they're almost an outsider townsfolk that adds a drunk in a weird way. It's not exactly that, don't quote me on that. But what it does mean is they have this ability to potentially win the game if they can solve their little puzzle that they have. On the other side of that, there is somebody in town that's not functioning correctly. And they go hand in hand with the next one, the drunk. Meaning these two, I don't think they belong on a script together unless you've dedicated mainly all of your misinformation or misreg to your outsider roles. Then in that world, it can work. I've seen scripts where they're both on the same script and in play together. Sure, that's fine. It's just a little fragile, and I don't think it's worth it. I think you're putting too much into the outsider space, and I've mentioned previously, outsiders aren't going to be in every game. So if you're putting all of your misinformation into the Puzzle Master drunk combo, I don't think your script is going to work at player counts that you would want them to do. It's basically just going to be a 12-player script, and that's it. Or, 15 players if you really want to go down that road. The drunk has the best version of misreg, drunk, Droison, whatever, because they think that they are a townsfolk. And it also creates this paranoia in town. You also never really know if a drunk is in play or not, pending the script, especially in TB. Could be a poisoner that hit a librarian who saw two players as the drunk. Meanwhile, the Puzzle Master absolutely knows they're the Puzzle Master and that there is a puzzle drunk in play. So that's a huge difference between these two. The Goon on here has an interesting type of Droison that doesn't do much on the wrong script. You absolutely need roles that choose at night, And I'll be honest, previously on my minion thing, I forgot to add this role, but I've added it since, so we're going to pop over and look at it. I've added a role, and this tool will be added to the comments, a night choosing situation. So if you have a script where none of the roles choose, meaning you have good roles on script or bad roles on script, and they don't actually pick other players, there's no reason for the goon to be on that script. The only way it's turning is from a demon trying to kill it, and that's both unfair to town and kind of boring. It doesn't really do much. So I believe that the goon itself needs that kind of setup, right? You need to work with it. So it's got probably one of the more unique versions of Droison. And it changes alignment, but we'll look at that later. All right, the Plague Doctor can Droison. I have a unique on here because it's based on what's on script. So the Plague Doctor is going to maybe put out a Widow Call. Maybe there's a Xaan that's not in play, and somehow the Plague Doctor dies on night 2. Sorry, during the execution phase on day 1. Bam, you've got all this Droison out of nowhere. Can also potentially add a Marionette, which is a weird form of Droison in a way. More or less adding an evil player, but they don't know it. Politician I have here under Droison Misreg. Now, this is not, I put unique for a reason. This is not specifically misregistration. They're not misregistering as anything, really. Not mechanically anyway. However, they are playing like a piece of shit. And that version of that play, even though they're a good role, they're going to actually register by players as good. Yet they're not playing like that half the time. So that is a misregistration to the good team. And it's possible that they don't even win with the evil team, which is kind of funny. But I've put that under here because it's a form of kind of misreg that I think is unique. Meanwhile, the next one down is exactly mechanically misregistration, is the Recluse. They do a lot of work with that. A lot of storytellers throw a Recluse on script, just like script builders throw a Recluse on script, just like you would throw a drunk on script. And I'm not against it. I think most scripts can handle a Recluse. We'll look at notable interactions later, but their type of misregistration is typically pretty useful, and it's a great bluff. And then finally, the Sweetheart. The Sweetheart's interesting because it's the only one, let me look through this real quick. Yeah, it's the only one I believe that doesn't affect night 1 at all. So the Sweetheart has to die before it can do anything. That's important if you're looking at a script that's got a lot of first night rolls. If you have first night rolls and Sweetheart is one of the primary ways for Droisoning, that's a problem. You actually see this on S&V. The Sweetheart has no interaction with the Clockmaker. Not unless a Pit Hag makes a Clockmaker mid-game, which is kind of stupid, but you get the point. It's not the best scenario. So, noting all of that, the Sweetheart has a good synergy, but I think you need to build other Droising around the script if you're going to use or feature night 1 information rolls. All right, the next category is Evil Survival. We talked about this on the minion selection, and this has very similar things. So the Barber, our first one, and probably our most famous one, is the ability to move the demon somewhere else. So if they're getting a lot of heat and the Barber dies, you can kind of shuffle around the demon. You can also keep the Barber in play, which is interesting. The Hatter has a very similar effect to the Barber. Depending on how you set up your script, I have Evil Survival on here because you might have a Scarlet Woman, you might have an Imp that you make into play, a Fang. Those things allow the demon to move afterward. And I, myself, typically run Chaos Hatter. There's very, very rare instances where I choose not to. But Chaos Hatter, it works just like a Barber. Yeah, the main difference between the Hatter and the Barber is you can't keep a Hatter in play. The Barber can be swapped into town. And you can't swap a townsfolk with the Hatter. That could be useful on some scripts. I've seen a Marionette comboed with a Barber to really, really confuse the good team where they swapped a Marionette in play for an actual townsfolk role to what the Marionette was, allowing them to maybe get the Banshee ability or something. It's very powerful. The next one down for Evil Survival we have as the Heretic. The reason that is on here and it's marked as unique is because it is a reason that the evil team may not be killed by town. If there's a Heretic claim and town knows who the demon is, they're not likely to execute them if they don't know for sure, especially if the demon can't get away. The Lunatic is a weird one. I have it marked here as Evil Survival because there's a possibility that the good team is just believing that the player is just a lunatic. Even though they've seen the demon, They think that they were the demon originally. It's kind of a Hail Mary to get out of it. And depending on what else is on the script, it may keep you alive for a few days or just long enough. The mutant is a evil survival pending how they play. If the mutant breaks madness, the storyteller can hold that in the chamber, execute them, and allow evil one more day to get away with whatever they need to do. And then finally, the Plague Doctor. It's similar to what we were talking about before. It depends what's on script. Pit Hag, Scarlet Woman, maybe you have a Mastermind, which is kind of cheeky, or you had a Goblin in play. Those things are able or allow the Plague Doctor to keep the demon or evil team going. Now we have alignment changers, and since the release of the Ogre, we have 3 of them now, which is kind of fun. We have the Goon, which is present on BMR, and out of these 3 that exist, it's the only outsider that has built-in alignment changing. Now, just stepping back real quick, we mentioned the Fangu earlier, but we did not mention why outsiders are running away. The Fangu means yes to all of these. So any one of these can become a evil demon and change alignments. So that's very, very important when considering this. And noting that the Goon changes alignment based on being selected first in the night to that player's turn order. So if you want a competition between the good and evil team, you need to make sure that good has roles that select before evil in the night. Evil may just lock a Goon down if there's no option to do so, but honestly, you should favor it that good gets bad information at the cost of keeping the Goon on board. I think that's a fair trade when you're looking at that. But you know what? You do you when you're making your script. The Ogre changes alignment, but they don't learn about it. It has a funny synergy with the Cannibal. Note that you should have a Spirit of Ivory on for probably most scripts that you make, and that can be a problem. The Ogre eaten by a Cannibal, and the Cannibal picks a player they think might be evil. If the Ogre's already turned evil and you have a Spirit of Ivory, the Cannibal may not understand that they should not be playing for evil at that point, which can be a funny combo. And you know what? It's an outsider doing outsider things. Also of note, the Ogre has an alternative way you run it, Constant Friend. I recommend running Constant Friend anytime you have a Snake Charmer or a Summoner on your script, because the Snake Charmer and the Summoner don't add an additional evil, if you know what I mean. You have actually one less evil with the Summoner in play, and a Snake Charmer keeps the same amount of evils, it just rotates it. What it allows is the Ogre to stay on the same team as maybe a summoned target or a Snake Charmer who Snake Charms the demon / vice versa. I think that is way more interesting, and those are the 2 main times that would be okay. Finally, you have the Politician here. Politician changes alignment at the end of the game, pending how the storyteller feels about that situation. All right, the next section here isn't really for script building, but it's something that I wanted to discuss because it is something that's only featured right now in Outsiders as far as I've heard. And if I'm wrong, hit me in the comments. Get at me. Tell me I'm wrong. I suck at this game. All right, the first one we have here is the Butler. The Butler can only vote when their master is voting. And if they don't, they're technically cheating. There's no other penalty for that. And that's going to be how all of these roll. The Golem cannot nominate more than once, even if their first nomination didn't do anything. The Klutz has to wake up. Klutz and Moonchild, both, when they die, need to claim their role and choose a player. If they don't do that, they are cheating. And then finally, the newest one is the Zealot. The Zealot just needs to keep their little paw in the air the entire game. Probably the easiest one out of all these. And honestly, the most fun. I'll be honest, I've probably screwed up Butler and Zealot more than anything in the world. It's very easy when you're in the heat of the game to just not do a thing. All right, win conditions. So there's win conditions present within the Outsiders, and they mainly effectively help the evil team. What I mean by that is it's possible, based on the way that the character is written, to help the good team, but that's usually only if their alignment is changed via like a Mezephiles, or if an evil pit, if a pit egg like makes an evil outsider or something. So the damsel, if they're guessed, the evil team can win. The heretic's an interesting one because it's a win. This is the only unique one I think out of these where the win conditions are just flipped. So this can actually help good, depending what's going on in the game. The Klutz needs to pick a good player or their team loses. And then finally we have the Saint down here. If they get executed, then the team that they're on loses. All right, the next column is the script impact. So this is more of a subjective kind of column. And what I mean by this is how much an outsider will warp the way your script plays. I've got a couple of different categories on here, from basically none all the way to game warping. And I'll kind of explain them as we go. I'm going to skip over the ones that barely interact with the game. They mainly just have a function where they do a thing, and then that's that. They don't impact the way that the solve is going. And kind of an example of that is like a Moonchild, right? They do have their impact. They have some kind of form of potential misinformation if a player gets saved or doesn't die when they're supposed to. But you get the idea. They're not really affecting the game in such a way where the town needs to play differently. As opposed to, let's go to like a medium. The medium roles all have things like the lunatic, right? The lunatic doesn't change the way town plays. It more changes the way that the demon actually plays sometimes, which is kind of funny. We also have a recluse over here. The recluse is on a lot of scripts. They don't even interact with other players for the most part if they're not selected or seated next to other players. So they have very minimal impact from a script perspective. And you need to build a script around that, by the way, as well. And then the sweetheart is the other one where if this player dies, then, you know, somebody's Droison. All right, I want to look at roles that have a high impact to the script and kind of talk through why that is. All of these roles tend to really impact the way that town plays. If a barber dies, then town has to contend with the fact that the demon has moved. Same thing for the potential hatter in play. This is also the category where two of our alignment changes are at. It impacts directly how town needs to account for voting. In Final Four in a 12-player game, you typically only need to worry about having 4 votes so that the evil team can't rise up and tie it. With the potential goon or ogre, there may need to be 5 or more votes to actually impact this final vote and make sure that there's no tie that happens. The Puzzle Master adds a drunk to town, giving a reason for town to discredit information or find worlds where that is happening. That same thing will be with the drunk, but we'll come back to that. That's on the highest tier. And then the Plague Doctor is kind of similar to that, the Hatter and the Barber. Then for game warping roles, all the game warping ones make sense. The Damsel completely changes how town plays. Double claims are going to be very normal. The Heretic almost features a similar thing to the Damsel, but even more so, because if the evil team just decides to die, or if Good's just solving so well and they find the demon and kill them and the Heretic never came out, there's not much you can do about that, and the evil team just wins. The other two on here, I'm going to give you a little bit more explanation. We'll start with the Politician. So the Politician I have is game warping because it's a good role. It's good. It's not registering as good, it's just good. That is playing for evil, because they can become evil. That can lead to a lot of confusion for town. It's more than a goon or an ogre where they're not sure, so there's some evidence of them out there. A politician might not give any evidence at all. They can pretend that they're basically anything and live in that world and just throw a vote here and there to really F up town and not even know if they're going to win or not. I would say if you're going to put a politician on your script, you need to be very, very careful about what you put on there as well. But it can be a fun role to play, so. I have the drunk marked as game warping because it absolutely is. Even though I love the drunk, and I do think that the drunk could be featured on most scripts, I think that when players are trying to solve the game, drunk as a possibility will always come up if it's on script. They want to add that in there. You give a little scapegoat to evil, and it adds one more possible world on why you're wrong or why another player's information doesn't work. It gives a way for evil to kind of back into bad information. It does a lot of work by itself. It also reduces the number of outsiders that are possible to be claimed, because if a drunk is in play, that's kind of a negative outsider mod, which means that the evil team can claim a outsider and seem like they're confirmed based on player count. It's a very, very strong role just to have on a script. It did not even need to be in play to do that. I've also categorized when each outsider affects town negatively. Some outsiders affect town when they die. Some affect town while they're alive, such as the mutant. Some have a unique condition. Those are the ones I'm going to dive into. And then some are just persistent, such as the Puzzle Master. So going through the unique ones, the Golem, it's not necessarily hurting town. It's not helping town. It will probably produce a kill, but other than that, it just sits there. It's a unique one. If the script is built in such a way where the Golem is confirmed, Instead of final 3, you just get a final 4. So don't throw mayors on a script with a golem because you're just going to kill in final 4 half the time if the golem's still alive. The unique one for the ogre is it depends if the ogre picked a good player or not. If the ogre picks a good player, they may not hurt town at all. They may just be helpful. They'll come out with their role. They're going to help town solve. It's great. The saint is unique because it needs to be executed, not just when it dies. If it's not executed, it doesn't do anything bad. If it's poison when it's executed, all the better. So it's a unique one because it's a win-loss condition, but its effect on town is only if town decides to go all in on it. And then finally, the tinker. The tinker can just hang out. Its main effect and its badness is when it dies, usually at night. But if it dies during the day, it's a confirmed outsider. That's just really strong for the good team. So honestly, I had to put a unique one there because it can just be a confirmed good roll. For waking patterns, there's only a few outsiders that do actually wake at night. Some of them may not wake at all, even though they have the ability to. For the butler, they're going to wake each night and choose a master. The drunk depends on what role that they received. So if the drunk doesn't get information at night, they don't wake up. The goon only wakes up when they're selected and change alignment. The lunatic wakes up if they're a specific demon that should be waking up. If they're the Leviathan, they're not going to wake up for their role. Importantly, it does count as waking when they get their demon and minion information on night 1. If they wake up to learn there's no poppy grower in play, that is also technically the lunatic doing their ability. Because again, they're not actually the demon. So anytime that you arbitrarily wake up a lunatic to tell them things that are related to being a demon, they're waking up due to their own ability. So just note that when you're thinking about how to build a script. And then finally, the ogre. The ogre only wakes up on the first night and then they choose a player, and that's it. Speaking of choosing, the next column we talked about that coincides with the goon, there's only a few of these. It's night choosing. So at night, the butler chooses, the drunk may choose depending on what role that they saw. Same thing for the lunatic, and then the ogre itself. Now, a couple of outsiders cause death, and you may be building a BMR-ish script. So let's look through some considerations on this. The golem only causes death during the day. That can have some interesting synergies. If the golem is on a script with the Godfather and they punch an outsider, that is an outsider that died during the day. Also, alternatively, if there's a Zomboul on script and you have a golem that punches anybody and they die, the Zomboul will not get a kill tonight. Keep that in mind when you're making your scripts together. The Moonchild will produce a kill as per BMR. The mutant has to be executed to die, so when they do die, it's considered an execution. Please note that the mutant can die at night. It's up to the storyteller. They're well within their rights if the mutant is breaking madness to execute them during the night and have them be dead. They should announce that, though. The Plague Doctor can produce deaths if there's an assassin or potential Godfather on script, and storyteller gains that ability. And then finally, the Tinker, which we've already kind of covered. Now, we were talking about damsels earlier, and this is a good category to be aware of when you're building a script with a damsel on it. Whether or not evil knows you're alive or where you are. So I have this kind of broken down into a few different categories, either from the start of the game, on a trigger, or indirect. Now, from the start of the game means that the evil team learned about you or from you from the storyteller right when the game started. So we have that for damsel, from the lunatic, from the snitch, right? Those three are just known to the evil team. Indirectly, we have a drunk, we have a goon, we have a plague doctor. Those are based on potentially for the plague doctor gaining a minion ability that's jinxed so that a minion has to receive the ability. For the goon, if a kill doesn't work and nobody's saying anything about what happened, and maybe a player that you selected yesterday is acting a little more fishy today, well, they might just be the goon that got changed. And for the drunk, if a player's information makes no sense and evil controls all of the misinformation, you might be able to identify where a given drunk is. Also, a lot of the times, evil knows the outsider count, and if there's nobody claiming specific outsider roles, that also is a sign that there's a drunk in play. Then finally, we have a couple of these that are on a trigger. So the trigger is the Hatter and the Barber. If they die, the demon gets to do some decision making, right? And with the Hatter, even the minions get to get in there for it. Now, I'm introducing a new column that's also going to be on the townsfolk when we get to them. It's Boffin Utility. And it's broken into a couple different things. I think the Boffin is wonderful. I think that a lot of people are just throwing it on scripts right now. It's very important to note that a Boffin ability for the normal minion Boffin should help the demon. However, there is an alchemist that is available and maybe on your scripts, so I've included that as a potential as well. So let's go through these real quick. I'm going to kind of categorize them so it's easier to see. I want to look at just the alchemist ones first, because this is interesting and fun. So for the alchemist, these are ones that it would help the good team if the evil team had to deal with it, such as the butler. And I have them categorized by rarely, meaning there's some times where it's interesting and sometimes where it's not, and often where it's usually helpful for the good team. So if the demon is alchemist boffined as the butler, then they have to vote with their master, which means they can't do the voting that they normally might want to do. They may not even out that they're the butler or anything like that. They're just kind of dealing with it. However, they can just pick the evil team. So it is a weird one where they have to follow through with it. It can work if their evil team starts dying. It also makes them pair well with their evil team, which a lot of people watch voting. So if you're just voting with them, it's a great kind of play there to be stuck with that. But yeah, it does limit your ability to vote. The mutant is pretty cruel, but the demon should be able to get around that because of bluffs. That's really on the storyteller. If you're going to give the alchemist Boffin the mutant to the demon, then you should also probably give really bad bluffs so that the demon has to deal with the fact that they have the mutant ability. Potentially just outsider bluffs, and now they're really cooked for a little while. And then finally the Zealot. The Zealot's probably the funniest one to Alchemist Boffin. The demon is just voting all day. Note that the Alchemist does not learn that this is an ability to happen. Right? They don't learn the exact power that the demon gets. All right, let's go through the rarelies real quick. So the reason I have these marked as rarelies is because there's a specific instance where these things are fun or interesting, right? The Tinker, if you have an Alchemist Boffin Tinker, then the demon may die at any point. That sucks, but it can be fun. It can be fun if there's like some kind of Scarlet Woman situation, or if you have a setup that your storyteller's working with the demon to say, hey, if this happens, then I'm going to Tinker kill you. It's fun. Again, you got to know your team. The Alchemist Boffin Saint I have as rarely, because if you kill the demon, you win most of the time anyways. However, if there's a Scarlet Woman in play, this does now no longer allow them to just die and offer it off to the Scarlet Woman. If they die, they lose. So it is a fun debuff for that. They just have to kill the Boffin, the Alchemist Boffin first. They're not going to learn that either, which is funny. Actually, let's talk about that real quick. There's an interesting interaction with the Alchemist Boffin and the demon. There's no confirmation that an Alchemist Boffin is dead. If a player is compelled to do such a thing, such as a Cannibal that learns that they're a butler or a zealot, yada yada, they're compelled to do that until they mechanically have confirmation that they're allowed to do something else. So in this world, the demon technically never confirms mechanically that they never have the butler or the zealot or the mutant ability, right? But only two of these are compulsory, the butler and the zealot. They have to do that the entire game or they're cheating, technically. Now, I would say as a storyteller, I might house rule that to be, hey, if you think they're dead and you're doing it, yeah, I don't know. I never really, it's a tricky one. Anyway, let's not dive into that too deeply. Anyway, let's look at these other ones here. The Klutz, if you give the Klutz power to them, then they have to confirm a good player. If you give the damsel ability to them, then you better have a good reason, right? There's not really much of a reason to do it. I've played one game where it was interesting, and if you don't tell anybody, I'll tell you right now. Our storyteller gave the alchemist damsel ability to the demon. Then they told the recluse that a damsel was in play. This allowed the recluse to guess the demon and win the game. However, the recluse had to figure out what the hell any of that even meant. It was very interesting. So if you're going to do that one rare scenario, that's fun. That's interesting. Again, don't tell them about this video if you're going to do that. All right, and then finally the lunatic, which I glossed over. The lunatic's a weird one. You could technically do this to give them a demon that type that they're not. So they pull it out of the bag, they think they're that. But they are going to learn that they are the lunatic immediately after because they're still the demon, right? They still have their own power, they just also have this. So it's a very unique, rare one. I wouldn't do that one very often, but hey, it could work. All right, let's look at the actual Boffin ones because there's not many of these, but they are interesting. The ones that are okay to give the demon most of the time. If you're going to have a Boffin script, these ones are perfectly good. The Goon. I really love the Goon. If you select the Demon and they have the Goon ability, they do not get the information they're looking for. If you have a Fortune Teller that's selecting the Demon and Exorcist, maybe even a Village Idiot, they're getting bunk information until the Boffin is dead. The Golem is a hard confirmed character when they kill somebody. The Boffin both allows the Demon to bluff that and put sus on the actual Golem. It's also fun because the Demon might hold on to their Golem ability until late game and then punch to win. That's a little more rare though. The Drunk is awesome because it's basically another poison, or like almost like a Widow poison. It's a little weaker than that, but it does allow you to put a Drunk out there as a player, and you'll know who exactly the Drunk is. You'll also know that they are a townsfolk role because you have to give this to a townsfolk. So it's got a little bit of information built into it, which is kind of fun. I would not pair that, by the way, with the Damsel. Again, that's another one that just points at townsfolk and points away from, based on the jinx, points away from outsiders. So very, very strong. And then we have the Puzzle Master. Puzzle Master is great because the Demon never has to reveal that they have this ability. The Storyteller likely put the Puzzle Drunk on a player who's very helpful for the evil team. And if the Demon wants to go and figure out who it is, they can just guess one of the players. And if they get their own name, they'll know who's Puzzle Drunk, which is super useful for the evil team. Now, the other ones that I have on here sometimes kind of depend on what else is in play. If you have a Boffin Hatter, well, if the Demon passes via like a Fangu or an Imp or something, then the evil team can kind of rearrange themselves, which is interesting. It also allows a newly created Fangu to join the fun. They get to wake up with everybody and learn their team. It's got a lot of synergy in there. The Moonchild is a rare one. You might do this because you get a free kill on a good player. Again, you can only really do this if you're the Imp, Fangu, or have a Scarlet Woman. Maybe a Zombull too, right? That's the other one that I didn't mention much. Plague Doctor is similar, where you get an ability in play. The Recluse allows you to kind of misregister potentially as a minion, or just count as other things, right? Because the Recluse being able to register as a minion, if you get dreamed, you could get dreamed as not your role, right, as a minion, and as the actual role you're bluffing. So it does have good synergy. Again, Goon's a little stronger, but Goon does have a negative side where it's only the first player that picks you. The Recluse is consistent. The Snitch can be weird and interesting if you have a Boffin Snitch. I've kind of noted why or when that would be interesting. And then finally, the Sweetheart kind of falls in with the Plague Doctor and Hatter. All right, let's get into our interesting pairings, rough pairings, and our notes. Note that this is not like an exhaustive list. Feel free to look at it when you guys are reviewing this on your own and add anything that you believe also works. This is basically what I could come up with and fit inside of a box this large. There's definitely things that I'm going to miss. The Barber works really well with demons that can't move, allowing for more demon survivability. With regards to a Godfather, the Godfather both gets a kill from it, and the demon can keep a Barber in play. If this is comboed even more with like a Fangu, which is also on this list, the good team has to either keep whack-a-moling the Barber, thus giving the Godfather kills, or the Fangu may jump into them. It's a very, very interesting kind of trifecta situation that may keep happening. The Banshee is interesting, especially with the Marionette, which is also paired on here. If the Barber potentially swaps a Banshee with the Marionette, then the evil team now has an evil Banshee that they can kill and get information from, whereas the good team has no clue. Because when you receive the Marionette, you could be told any good roll, which means you'll think that you are that roll and that the other player is just a Banshee, and when they die, you'll think nothing of it. Very, very strong combo. I will say, though, that I'm not a big fan of the Barber with the Leech. I do have a script that contains it. I think it's a rare thing that should happen. But just moving around the Leech poison to somebody is a really, really tough solve for the good team, especially if they move it onto a role that no longer gets information. Also, if you have an Oho and a Damsel on script, please do not combine that with the Barber. That is a terrible combination. I'll tell you why. I get woken up at night as the Oho. Damsel. Barber. Then I make my swap. That's not good. That's unfun. Again, the Oho sucks anyway. The Butler. So for the Butler, interesting pairings on that one, kind of like the Goon. The Butler is one of the only outsider roles that can select. So if you're going to select anything and you feel kind of whatever with your mastering, then you can at least try to keep the Goon good. Of note, though, the Butler does go at the very end of the night, so it's not the most effective version of this. The Cannibal is also interesting. The Cannibal will be forced to vote like the Butler counterpart, and they get hard jinx confirmation of the butler in play. It's also an interesting combo with like a spy that gets eaten by a cannibal and gets forced to see butler, yada yada. You'll see that down at the zealot section as well. The butler's also interesting with the Vortox just because the Vortox has this whole execution thing. So the butler could be forced to not vote, whereas the good team needs all the votes they can get on a potential tie day, yada yada. Very interesting stuff. For the damsel, I think that the damsel pairs really well with a goblin or a boom dandy because those two roles can kind of out evil while they're looking for a damsel. It also allows the damsel to play a little bit more cagey, but with regards to the boom dandy specifically, the boom dandy wants to be executed so they can trigger. That prevents town from killing any players who are willing to die, which keeps the damsel alive. The goblin's a lot more loud about it, so it's less interesting. If a player doesn't claim goblin, they're safe to die with no boom dandy on script, right? The leech and the damsel, very interesting because the leech can also out evil. Anytime damsel's on script, VI is just a great add to that script. It gives an out for the damsel. It allows them to bluff that. It allows the good team to bluff VI to open claim space for the damsel. It's just great synergy. The Xaan is really good for the damsel because you don't know how many outsiders are in play with the Xaan. It does allow the damsel to potentially bluff another outsider role. It's weird and interesting. I think it works pretty well. Xaan is very Sentinel-like. I love it. I think it's great. The pixie is interesting with the damsel because of different bluffs. The huntsman knows the damsel's in play. Finally, rough pairings. I kind of mentioned this when we were discussing a lot of the evil knows you type things, and that's basically what it is. If evil can locate a lot of roles on script, like the king, the barber, etc., they're going to find the damsel a lot easier. So try to avoid that when you're building up your stuff. For the puzzle master, I think it goes really, really well with the Nodashi. Goes well with the poisoner because, again, if the puzzle master finds their puzzle drunk, they will find the demon. That is insanely strong. It also goes well with the Vigor Mortis, not because of the synergy of the poison, although that is pretty good. Remember, the Vigor Mortis can't actually poison anybody until night 2. The Puzzle Master allows for that night 1, but it also gives an insanely good bluff to a Vigor Mortis, especially if there's no Fang on script, so they can just out his Puzzle Master and kind of hang out. Again, they've already done their job. They're poisoning somebody and they're just trying to solve it, so it's a great bluff for the Vigor Mortis. For rough pairings, I don't think it goes very well with the Vortox at all. Again, Vortox makes all town information false. If a puzzle master is drunking a information roll and a Vortox in play, it's not doing anything. In fact, it's really hard for the puzzle master to even try to solve their stuff. It can work with mechanical rolls in play. It's just bad synergy. The pit hag is another weird one. It's interesting that a pit hag can both bring a puzzle master into play, thus removing a potential townsfolk, and then drunking another potential townsfolk. I think that can be a little too strong. I don't think it's that interesting. I do think that a lot of the times when I've seen that and I've ran it as a storyteller, I've simply put the puzzle drunk on the puzzle master. Don't tell me. It's a secret. All right, the drunk. So the drunk, I could probably list a bunch more, but I went with the ones that make a lot of sense to me. I think the drunk goes really well with the Baron. Again, the Baron and the drunk are just tied at the hip. They should just get a room together, you know what I'm saying? The Baron adds 2 outsiders. If you have a drunk on script, it always gives a little bit of wiggle room for the evil team to bluff outsider with the potential drunk in play. It's great. It's just a good combo. The drunk also, adverse to the puzzle master, goes really well with the Vortox. Because players who are drunk or poisoned still receive false information in a Vortox game, the drunk is an outsider and can receive good information. It's such a good combination. I actually invite all of you to try to explore that on your scripts. I think you'll find that it has very, very fun synergy. And it also allows the Vortox to hide a little bit more. Okay, don't overdo it. You can go really hard if you have also a marionette and such. It can make the game a little more complex. But, you know, if you build a certain script and your players are used to whatever complexity it is, then yeah, get to it. I mean, that's totally fine. The drunk is funny with the Fangu because the Fangu can jump into a player who already has a built-in bluff. If I'm here and I'm getting Savannah information all day long and bam, I'm the Fangu tonight, what the hell, right? I have a built-in bluff. I know that there's no Savannah in play because I received that at the beginning of the game. It's excellent, it's sexy, it's great. Similarly, and again, these are both on catfishing. The next one I'm going to name as well is the gambler. Okay, the gambler gambles a player and the gambler dies. It gives that other player an out, right? And potentially it's true. Potentially they are the drunk. It's just great synergy. The grandmother and the librarian both have a similar thing where the grandmother as a bluff is typically pretty hard for evil, especially on its base script. But on other scripts without a spy and with a drunk, you can actually bluff a grandmother who found the drunk, who sees exactly who the drunk is. I've done this a lot in real games where a grandmother really does see the drunk, and it's really useful. It doesn't help with the confirmation between the two, but it does help know where the drunk is if they believe that information. The librarian is just great TV synergy, which always works. All right, I do want to note that I think that the Xaan or Xaan is a rough pairing with the drunk, but I'm not married to it at the moment, so I'm not going to write it down yet. The reason for that, by the way, I just believe that if the Xaan and the drunk work that well, then the Baron is now defunct, and there's no reason to even have a Baron in play or in script building at all. I just do. I think that when you're going to do a Xaan script, I think the drunk should be considered as not on script unless you cannot figure out a better way to make your script. All right, I've already seen this happening. I think people are going to come back to my way of thinking over time, but I do just think it should be drunk, Baron, Xaan, no drunk. All right, I'm getting off my pedestal. All right, the Golem. So the Golem has a couple of fun synergies. The Golem and the Psychopath, there's supposedly some jinx that's coming out where the Psychopath can bluff as the Golem. According to Stephen Medway, these two are meant to be tied at the hip together with whatever they can do together. This is not in play or in effect yet. Still is interesting. If a Psychopath comes out, a Golem can kill a Psychopath. If a Golem comes out, a Psychopath can kill the Golem. It's like a fun little matchup between the two. Golem and the Godfather and Fang is just such a fun synergy. If you have a Golem that is aware of those on script, they may hide for a little while, especially with a Fang. If they ever come out and punch, a couple of things could happen. A, they could punch an outsider, thus giving the Godfather a kill. They could just punch the demon, which again is excellent, good for the Golem. They could also punch a minion, right? But mainly from that, they're going to get confirmed. And now Town has to make a decision. Do they let the Golem stay alive, thus potentially giving the Fang an open, confirmed target to jump to? Or do they execute the Golem and give a Godfather a kill? It's great. These three together are really fun, and you'll see I have a couple of scripts that feature that. I do just think that that's a good combo. The Golem also works really well with the new released Yaga, the Yaga Bobble. So the Yaga can make kills happen during the day, and it's another way similar to the Boffin and the Harpy that can simulate a Golem kill. I've actually been the Harpy. I've bluffed Madness Break on a player that I was Harpy mad at and bluffed Golem and then just sunk the Harpy into myself the rest of the game. With regards to the Goblin, if we have a Goblin claim and the Golem can stay alive long enough, aka usually to the next day, they could punch that Goblin out, and maybe there's a lot of regret all of a sudden for bluffing it. I think that synergy is good. If you combine that even with the Godfather and the Fang, you get a lot of nice synergy that you've already built in, and you can just build a script around that. And then finally, the Summoner. Because of the fact that the Golem can punch and confirm themselves, they're a great summoning target. They're also really good for holding it to day 3 to punch, showing that they weren't summoned. Noting that if you have other synergy on there, like the Boffin and such, it's not as clean as it sounds. All right, for the Goon, you want choosing roles. You want a good distribution of choosing roles. Always check out a base script when you're looking at how to implement a role on your script. You'll note that on BMR, a lot of roles choose, including the Lunatic, right? All the demons have choosing roles, so that all of the Lunatics roles will be choosing roles. And so they'll be able to interact with the Goon. It also has a good interaction with other roles on that script, like the Innkeeper, the Godfather, the Chambermaid, right? All for great reasons. And the Assassin. The Assassin's fun because it can take out a Goon and also change their alignment all in one night. Very powerful and fun. The Fortune Teller is a picker that I like and can select them similar to a Recluse, getting bad information. That bad information is great for the evil team. So if you want to have players that pick 2 different roles, similar to the Chambermaid, the Fortune Teller is a great add-on there, depending on your stuff. Now, for rough pairings, anything that can change alignment with a Goon, it might just be too much for your script. So pending changes in the future, right now, at this time, it's rough to have more than one alignment changer on a script where your storyteller doesn't have a lot of control over it. Now, what do I mean by that? If you have a Fang on your script and a Bounty Hunter on your script, I think that's fine. I think you should also have a drunk on your script. because otherwise you'll never have a Fangu and Bounty Hunter in the same game where you're trying to keep the game balanced. If you have a Bounty Hunter that is the drunk in play with a Fangu, they won't know that, and they could get jumped to, and it's just good synergy. So just keep that in mind when I say storyteller control over how many evils are in play, right? If you have an Ogre and you have a Baron and you have a Fangu, well, in that world, you can't have a Baron and a Fangu in play because you'd have multiple evils, right? If you put an Ogre in play, maybe don't put a Fangu in play. But again, it's up to you. Maybe your players are used to that or whatever, but it does become a harder game for the good team. All right, for the Hatter, it's a little bit different from the Barber. It's not completely different, and it can supplement a lot of the same roles that the Barber does. But it does provide one other thing, especially if you do Chaos Hatter. It provides the ability to swap out a Vizier or similarly loud or announced minion into some other role, unbeknownst to town. So let's say we have a Vizier, it's been doing its thing, it's out there, whatever, it's been announced. A Hatter dies, it's possible for that Vizier to now be the Poisoner. And town has to either waste a day going for it or see if the Vizier is playing like a Vizier still. So it's very useful. It's interesting. If you simply have a Barber, that Vizier is locked down as the Vizier the entire game. If you roll swap that bad boy out, it can only be to a dead player. Otherwise, another player is going to get announced as a Vizier. It's going to be a little weird. It's not going to end the way that you want it to. You should note, I do have this note here, by the way, real quick. Always note on your script if it's supposed to be Chaos versus normal Hatter. Okay, just note that, because your script might be dedicated to a normal Hatter. It's good and interesting and useful for the storyteller to know which version of the Hatter that you planned on running it as when you built the script. Now, as far as things that aren't as clean with a Hatter, similarly the Leech, I think a lot of optimal plays is to get caught as a demon, kill the Hatter, and switch into a Leech. That's not that interesting. The Barber, just because they do the literal exact same thing. And then a Goblin. Goblin can be pretty cruel to town. So if you think that you have the situation solved, where you know that this is exactly the demon, yada yada, and then they get away, they kill the Barber, and they swap into a Goblin, it can be a little rough. It can be a little rough. But hey, it's not bad. It's just rough. It's not the worst thing in the world. Again, they may play that way, and that's... again, that's the power of the Hatter. The Hatter's supposed to be a really, really strong outsider. It only procs once. That's a big, big, big difference from that and the Barber. All right, moving down to the Heretic. The Heretic, I think... So, just real quick, and it's in our notes over here. The script for a Heretic should be built around the Heretic, okay? If you don't build it, do not add this as, oh, I have a fourth spot here. Let's throw a Heretic in. No, don't do that. Don't do that. You're going to lose all my respect. The Sentinel is a great Heretic combo. I think most scripts that have a Heretic should have a Sentinel. Most scripts that have a Heretic prior to the Xaan release could not have an unknown amount of outsiders to the evil team sans the Balloonist. Because all of the other... that's not entirely true, actually, because the Lord of Titan and the Kazali came out recently. But the older scripts with the Heretic, it usually had a... Like, Baron Jinx was one thing that came into play, where the Baron's not sure if it's in there. Godfather's 100% jinxed with the Heretic. So, hard jinxed, I should say. So yeah, the Heretic itself is more interesting if the evil team's not sure if it's in play or not. And to do that best is to have a Sentinel on the script. Now, that's been changed with the Xaan. The Xaan effectively is a Sentinel. It's a solvable Sentinel, and maybe a broken solvable Sentinel if the storyteller plays it a certain way. But the evil team has a puzzle to solve when it comes to the Xaan to figure out if a Heretic's in play. I think that synergy is unexplored and interesting, and I'm happy and excited to see it happen in the future. The Fangu is interesting with the Heretic because they can jump to it, and now there's no longer a Heretic in play. Not only that, evil knows there's no Heretic in play. And then you have the Savant, which can give you information on if a Heretic's in play or not. An Artist, which can do a similar thing. Okay, I don't think that it pairs well at all with the Spy and the Widow. I know they have a Jinx that got changed and allows that to be a thing. I think it's still boring. I think it's still unfun. I think you just don't put those on a script together. Then you have the Oho, which can just say the word Heretic. Again, Oho sucks. And then the Gossip. The Gossip's a little rough. So Artist and Gossip do similar things where they get information. Gossip gets it mechanically, and Gossip gets it loudly. It should be noted that Evil knows the majority of kills that are taking place in a given game, and the Gossip producing a gossip on a heretic is mostly giving evil that information. So if you do have a gossip on your script, it's more of a player skill thing. They should be careful. They should be very careful. The Klutz is a great bluff for the Vigor Mortis. It's a great bluff for the Imp, Fangu, Legion. This is looking similar, right? Demons that die. That way they can claim it and do the thing. It's a little weird with the Lycanthrope because of the faux pas. I am ruling it in my games that a Klutz that chooses a player that is designated as the faux pas, or the Lycanthrope Evil, it used to be called, the one that's registering as an evil player. I'm calling it that it does not produce a loss for the game. I don't think that's an interesting situation because it's hard to solve. It's also not that interesting and fun. It's random. It can turn into a confirmation tool, by the way. That's something interesting about the Klutz. So when it doesn't end the game, if it's actually in play and the player is a Klutz, they know for a fact, sans being directly poisoned, that whoever they picked is a good player. The Lunatic has a lot of fun synergy on custom scripts, more so than even their home script. You'll note on here, I don't have any of the BMR roles on here. They're all fine. There's a lot of stuff that you can do with it. I mean, Innkeeper and such all help for reasons why the Lunatic's kill didn't go through. The different amounts of players they can kill is another really interesting thing. But specifically to keep the Lunatic thinking they're a Lunatic, we have a few roles that really stand out in the Poppy Grower and the Magician. Because they don't know who their minions are, it solves the main issue you run into on BMR, where the Lunatic runs directly up to their minions and says, "Are you my minion?" And then they get told no, and now they know. The Marionette allows the storyteller to fake a minion that doesn't even know they're a minion. This produces some really, really fun and interesting gameplay. So if you have a Magician in play, and you have a Marionette given to a Lunatic, I mean, you don't even need the Magician in play, but you're saying all this to the Lunatic, they now are helping convince another player that they're evil. It's seriously fun. It's a good combo. It can be quite damaging if there's no way for the Lunatic to solve it, like a Leviathan situation, or maybe a Zomboul script where they're just not getting kills. But it's still funny. It's still good. And it can still be solved and interesting. And Lycanthrope with the Lunatic is interesting because the Lunatic doesn't know why their kills aren't going through. Well, Lycanthrope is a really straightforward thing on why their kills aren't working. And then with Leviathan, because Leviathan doesn't actually produce any kills, you can keep the Lunatic guessing for a longer period of time. Note that with Legion, it can be a little rough. If you've got a Lunatic Legion in a Legion game, they're going to be playing kind of chaotically. They're going to be voting, right? The way to help with that, this is more for storytelling than script writing, give them a lot of the good team as evil team, and then start killing their good team quickly in the night. So if you've got Legion that the Lunatic think are good, start killing them. That's going to really confuse that player, and they'll be like, no way did two good players already die at night. I have to be a Lunatic. All right, next thing is Moonchild. So Moonchild's great as a kind of solid role. It's almost a townsfolk. You hear that a lot. It's kind of a gimmicky thing. But it's really good with roles like the Assassin, where if a Moonchild happens to pick an evil player, they can bluff it. Multi-kill demons, it's good, because then the Moonchild can be a part of that confusion. Gossip, it works well with. Zomboul, it's good. It's also a good bluff for the Zomboul if they die. It's a really, really bad role if there's no other way for extra deaths to happen on the script, because the Moonchild is very confirmable in that world. It's a little too strong, actually. The Mutant is really fun with Cerenovus and with Leviathan. If the Cerenovus is on a script and there's a mutant, right, you can go fishing for them. If the mutant's on a script without a Cerenovus, they can break madness and potentially be hard confirmed by the storyteller. It's not a requirement, and that's a reason why Mutant and Leviathan work really well together, because there's a harsh penalty if the mutant decides to break. That's one of the two good executions that Good has for a Leviathan game. And then in a Legion game, it's just a great bluff, right? On a Legion script, I should say. It's a great reason why there's double claims. It adds more confusion to town. It's lovely. It's a good thing to have on there. The recently introduced Ogre has some really, really fun synergies, even with a couple of the ones that we just mentioned. It works really, really well with Lunatic. If an Ogre picks a Lunatic, the Lunatic's playing chaotically, the Ogre doesn't know what's going on. It works well with Marionette for similar reasons, where they think they're good, the Marionette thinks they're good, but they both are on the evil team at the same time. It works in a really interesting way with Cannibal. It gives you a reason not to execute the Ogre because Cannibal doesn't want to have to pick a player and become a new alignment. Or maybe they do. Or maybe they don't even become that new alignment. It's a tenuous situation, and that's what an outsider should provide. It works really well with Snake Charmer and Summoner too. I kind of already went into that. It's rough on a script with more evils than can be added, but we've already talked about that when it came to the Goon. I do recommend Constant Friend as mentioned previously, so that's a big note when you're using Snake Charmer and Summoner specifically. For the Plague Doctor, I really think the Plague Doctor can work on a lot of different scripts. It does come down to what minions you have on the script though. It also works really, really well in a Legion game because the Storyteller can kill the Plague Doctor early and give themselves a ability that keeps the evil team kind of in question on whether there is a Legion in play or maybe they actually do have minion powers. That's something that you can do if you have like a Serenovus on script or similarly loud things. But for other abilities, Scarlet Woman's a really, really good combo with the Plague Doctor. It allows the Storyteller to give the Scarlet Woman ability and give Demon survivability to the evil team. It works really well with Serenovus because it's fun to just make people Seromad as a Storyteller. Boffin is great. There's actually some abilities that are worse on a regular script with just a Boffin giving it to the demon than the Storyteller giving the Boffin ability. One of them, namely, is the Minstrel. So if you get a Plague Doctor Boffin Minstrel, that's better because both minions can die in a 12-player game and create 2 Minstrel Knights. Whereas if it's just the Boffin doing it, if the Boffin gets executed, there's no more Minstrel ability. So it's something to consider. The Marionette is also a really fun synergy with the Plague Doctor due to the Jinx. Baron can be added on here. There's just so many. Honestly, Plague Doctor just has a lot of synergies. I don't think there's many scripts where it is bad on, but yeah, it does vary wildly depending on what kind of minions you have in play. For the Politician, I think it works really well as a Vigor buff. I think it works really well with Goblin on script. It gives a reason for the Politician to claim loudly and be chaotic and potentially signal to the evil team, hey, I'm here to work with you guys. I'm trying to help. It works with Village Idiot because that's more claim space. Similar to the Damsel, it allows them to play in such a way where they're giving confusion to town with Village Idiot pings. Works with Mayor mostly because I don't know why this comes up so often, but a lot of politicians try to pretend they're the mayor and they get to final 3 that way. It works better than actual mayors. I don't get it, but it is just fun to have on there. But it doesn't work as well with extra evils. I've seen it on some scripts. I think it's a little bit rough. I actually do have a script that has a politician and an ogre. I want it to happen. That's mostly just selfish me. But it is probably a little rough on the good team if it ever does happen. Recluse has so many fun synergies. The Vigor is a really interesting one. If the Vigor Mortis kills a Recluse, the Storyteller can treat the Recluse as a minion and poison one of their townsfolk neighbors. So good. It gives a good use to that power. The negative synergy from that is that a Vigor Mortis reduces the outsider count. I absolutely hate that portion of it. But yeah, it's a good combo. It's also a good bluff for the Vigor as well. A Fortune Teller and the Recluse is just fun synergy. It's a great bluff for that world if the evil team's doing it, or it's a nice piece of misinformation for the Fortune Teller since, again, it's 2 pings. A lot of what you'll see in TB is 2 pings pinging off different things so that you have sus on both sides, so you're never really sure which one you hit correctly. Seamstress has similar ones, although I'll be honest, a lot of the times whenever the Seamstress hits off of a Recluse, you're probably going to register it in such a way that the Seamstress gets a no. That way it almost always looks like the other side of the ping is a good boy. So it's just something to consider. The Lycanthrope works really well with it, but this is more prior to the faux pas that was added with the new update. Lycanthrope can attack a Recluse, and the Recluse may not die if the Storyteller, registers them as evil, and I think that's a good synergy for it, but nowadays with the faux pas, it's not required on scripts. I used to almost always exclusively put a Recluse with a Goon, potentially, and a Lycanthrope, just so there's more reasons the Lycanthrope kill wouldn't work. Slayers and Scarlet Womans together are really interesting with the Recluse. Again, not required, but the Slayer that shoots a Recluse with no Scarlet Woman and kills it, that's silly. That's just confirming 2 players and also removing a source of bad information with the Recluse in play. Some things that it's a little rough on, which I didn't note on here, I'm going to add right now. The Oracle. The Oracle and the Recluse. Nobody likes that. Nobody likes it. But it is interesting. You know what it does do? It gives a reason that the Recluse is an outsider. If you're going to go out of your way to execute a recluse, then you're going to ruin the Oracle number. So, yeah, in that world, fine. It's good. It's just a little rough. There's a couple of other rough pairings, but I think the Oracle is the biggest one that comes to mind at the moment. For the Saint, really fun synergy with a Slayer and a Scarlet Woman. The Slayer can confirm a Saint is not currently the demon. A Scarlet Woman loves to do the exact opposite, bluffing as a Saint and then not being, the demon when they get shot, but then becoming the demon. It's great. It's got weird synergy with the Fangu. Because you can't take care of it as an outsider earlier than Final 3 without the expectation of the game ending, then you almost always have to leave the Saint to Final 3, which means they're usually the execution of Fangu game. It's weird. I've seen it on scripts. I'm not the biggest fan of that combo. It's not terrible, but it's rough. With the Serenovus and a Saint, if the Serenovus Seromads the Saint as something else, they can't out as Saint. The storyteller probably won't execute them unless they really break it. But the town themselves have no idea that this player is the Saint if they're Seromad as something else. So if they do just get executed, that's pretty rough. And it looks like I have Oracle here, but that was meant to be in the recluse spot. That doesn't really mean much there. Okay, the Snitch goes really well with Poppy Girl, Little Monster. Snitch is kind of a whatever burger. Not a lot of people really like the Snitch for its intended use because there's no counterplay on it. So the synergy right now is really just to give the minions bluffs in Little Monster and Poppy Girl games. There's some other scripts I've seen it work okay on, but usually there's other outsiders that can fulfill the better weaknesses of the script than a Snitch. The Sweetheart has the Vigor bluff is always. A lot of the stuff you'll see on SMV is good. Anything that wants to stay alive is a great Vigor bluff for outsiders. The Imp, the Fangu, the Vigor, Legion, those are all really interesting ones, just similar to the Klutz and Barber and such. The Lycanthrope has a funny synergy with the Sweetheart. If they kill the Sweetheart can drunk the Lycanthrope. Now that the Lycanthrope's drunk, the demon can kill that night. So be careful when you do that as a storyteller, by the way, because that will just confirm that the Lycanthrope is in play. If they're still alive, they got to kill, and there's no other way for multi-kills to happen. The Tinker has some really interesting synergy from mostly BMR stuff, but there's a couple of newly released characters that are fun. The Yaga and the Tinker work really well together, especially when you have a Yaga phrase that isn't working and you want to pop the Tinker midday to signal that it worked, or you're just selling a Yaga game when it's not even a Yaga game. You can also use it for the Witch, which isn't on here. Anything that produces day kills that's evil, you can have that bluffed by the Tinker, the Psychopath, yada yada. But yeah, all the BMR roles work. The Cannibal's a little funny. If they execute the Tinker, then the storyteller can just kill the Cannibal that night with the Tinker ability. I do think it's a little weird with Fangu scripts, because the Tinker is expected to die as their negative, and if they get jumped to, they can't die. It's just a little weird. I don't know. It's not the worst thing in the world, but again, there's probably other outsiders that fulfill the role that this thing's taken up. And then finally, the Zealot. The Zealot is almost what you'd call a loud outsider, because it has to vote every single vote. If the evil team's not bluffing it, and they're looking around and seeing somebody voting every single vote, they know where they're at. So it works really well with Fangu. Fangu's going to jump right to that sucker. However, that also means the good team probably knows where the sucker is at too. That's why it pairs also well with the Organ Grinder. The Organ Grinder hides voting. It allows the Zealot to be a little sneaky person for a little while at least. Now you do want to be careful with the Zealot and too many added evils, because the Zealot has to vote until there's only 4 players left. That means with a voting block, if you've got, let's say, an Ogre that picks the evil team in a 12-player game, that's 4 votes that are voting for evil. You get the Zealot voting every time. That's 5 votes. That's a voting block that happens really quickly in the game, potentially in like a day or 2. So when building your script, pay attention to what role each outsider is fulfilling. Remember, they're not going to replace the evil team's entire weaknesses, but they can help quite a lot. If you want town to solve for certain outsider pairings, make sure that you have the right information in play. If you want extra evils, try to be selective. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please let me know in the comments what your favorite outsider is for both script building and for playing. I, for one, want to pick somebody and be gaslit the entire game as the Ogre. All right, peace!